And it's much better than my MacBook one. Like generally the picture just looks better.
Is it really?
Yeah. Go figure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've been trying to get a standalone webcam, like a full HD webcam, but obviously since March, like you can't find them anywhere.
Yeah. We did find one for the kids, but it's not super high quality.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they needed it for school.
Cool. Well, thanks both for joining today. I think this one's going to be a fun one. So Jen, we've got a returning guest with us today. So you weren't able to join us the first time, and so definitely wanted to make sure I got an episode with the two of you. So today we have returning guest Eric Richter from the Dataquake Group. So he's the founding partner and chief data exorcist over there. Dude, I love that title, and I will use it every chance I get when you're on with us. So to get us started, we caught up last week, talked through a couple topics. I think we've got a bunch of really good things to talk about. But before we get started, Eric, give us an update on what's going on with you, what you've been up to since we last chatted.
So been working on some partnerships with some of the industry's leading platforms focused on data quality and governance. We're also having a lot of productive conversations with some potential customers to really hone in on what we want to do within the market, which, as I mentioned last time, is really around being custodians or janitors in the space. Not a lot of people really focus on the back end of things. They do all of the more exciting things, the data visualizations and the analysis and things like that. So, and really focusing on data quality and focusing on a lot of the data centric things, integrity of the data. I think we're going to go into a really cool space. Sorry for my dog's walking around if you hear her nails clicking on the floor.
That's what makes it real.
She's a pacer.
Mm-hmm. So as you're talking about like the the partnerships that you're working on, what are your thoughts on data quality as a service?
Data quality as a service, interesting. It's something that's sorely needed as long as it's good data. I guess I should probably say that. And lots of times I hear people talking about all the different data that we can give you, and we can capture everything, and you can just go and dial in and pull out the bits that you want. That all sounds fantastic to me most of the time until you start thinking about the details. Devil's in the details type of thing, where in terms of the data needs to be solid, right?
Well, it's interesting to me how you phrase that, Jim, of as a service, because I think a lot of folks think of QA tools and put a lot of perhaps investment and thought into which tools they're going to use. Obviously, ObservePoint comes to mind, though there are others out there too. But I feel like what most folks are missing are viewing it as a people resource thing or as a services thing, where tools are great, but a lot of people don't get full value out of them because they don't have the right people to use the tools. I think that's something our industry is going to have to pivot on here to improve data quality.
To piggyback off what you just said, lots of times the solution's great. Let's get a solution in here, and let's get it working. Looking at the marketing and listening to the sales guys, lots of times you hear, it can slice, it can dice, it can do this, it can do that. You can fire your entire QA team if you have one. The data is going to be perfect. Right?
It's kind of like the old TMS sales line of it's so easy, anyone, marketer can do it.
Right.
A single line of code. Yeah. I go back to that one. That one still gets me.
It's the marketers that lots of times really mess it up for everybody. That's why I said data as a service. Really depends on what it's being what it's there for, what you're going to be using it for, and where it comes from, right? So I don't trust it. All data is guilty until proven innocent.
Sometimes even when proven innocent.
Yes. And
how it's used.
Jen, to your point, where I was kind of going with that, one of the things the three of us chatted a bit about last week, and where that question was leading to was, let's talk about data quality, data integrity as its own COE or as its own practice within an organization. Because I think what we've all seen, I bet you we all have horror stories, is QA is a task. Data quality is a task that a part of each group involved, development, analytics, everyone has that, and then they have their own little isolated set of best practices for it. And one of the things we've been finding for years is that data quality in QA has to be much more holistic, taking in the whole ecosystem, not everyone just looking at their little slice of the world.
Yeah, I think for me, a good example of that frequently, implementation these days is often just done in Jira tickets. The developers want to know what are the expected results so they can check off this Jira ticket. And the expected results might go as detailed as, look at the analytics beacon and you should see V1 equal to this and V2 equal to that. But even that, that would be awesome for a lot of folks. They're not even that far of having that as part of their process. But even if it were, nobody's going to be looking at, does the MID, does the Experience Cloud ID stay the same between beacons? Or all of these other little nuances that until you're looking at the bigger picture or a lot of the kind of gotchas and things to watch out for, you're not going to catch on it on any single beacon, but only when you look at the whole user experience. Nobody's going to catch that because it doesn't readily fall into anybody's role. It doesn't fit on a Jira ticket as easily. Yeah, it's a problem.
Yep. And as far as like the holistic approach, one thing I even think of as far as that is common metric and dimension definitions. Mm-hmm. So what does the team or the organization define as revenue? Is it pre-tax, post-tax? Does it include this? Does it include that? Do you include discounts or not discounts? And then the data, what that you're defining as revenue, and then distributing that out across multiple tools. So you have your analytics tool, you have your various marketing tools. Are they all getting the same number? And are there discrepancies between that? And if there are, say, different definitions of revenue, one tool wants it one way, one tool wants it another way, documenting what those differences are, because what happens when you get that inexperienced person looking at both tools and they say, oh, revenue's off, there must be a technical problem somewhere. And I'm probably going off on a tangent here, but that's what I think of when I think of data quality holistically. It's also ensuring, are there common definitions? Is there a data dictionary? And then are we following standards across all tools? You start with the technical, like, is the beacon firing? And then beyond there, how is the data being distributed throughout the ecosystem?
Yeah, and I think that also plays into the tools versus people, because you can invest in, let's say, Observe Point, fully in Observe Point. And even if Observe Point, you have some services that are helping you make the most of it and actually set up all of your rules and journeys and things like that. If you don't have the data definitions, you don't have kind of your dictionary or a good sense of what your expected values and your key flows and maybe some of your edge cases, if you haven't already defined those, then that's going to limit the amount of value you can get out of a QA tool. And frankly, defining those will probably help beyond just QA. It's a good idea to have those things defined. But I think I often see that as the major hurdle for folks before they do QA, is you have to do the legwork of, well, we have to know what our expected results are for this particular user flow. And yeah, that's a big task for some folks.
for
Eric,
sure.
you're being uncharacteristically quiet.
I was listening. The last question you had around people um, and doing QA or division of labor, basically. Um, One point I wanted to add there was if you have developers, God forbid, doing QA, I call it unit testing. Some people call it QA, wrongly call it QA.
Yeah, and there's value in it, so long as
There
it's
is,
not
of
the
course.
only thing that you do.
Of course.
Yeah.
Typically, though, you're only going to test it one way. You're going to test it to make sure your code works in a specific set, usually on one browser, usually on Chrome or Safari or, I guess, Firefox way back in the day. But you're not really looking at it from an integration standpoint. You're not looking at it from how does it fit in with the larger part of a flow, for instance. If you're only looking at a single page or steps between a flow, you're doing it a disservice, obviously, and trying to put these. I guess they're tests, but they're not. There's no cohesion there with what you're trying to do. It really needs to be more of a process. It needs to be more of a thoroughness of thought needs to be put into, like you said, what are we expecting to see versus what are we seeing? And a lot of these things comes from context, right? So you've got folks that historically they've been given, here's what you need to test at the very tail end of things, because the development's happening so fast and things are changing so quickly. Don't even tell the QA guys what's going on. Just let them, at the very end, we'll let them know what they need to test. This is backwards and wrong. The context needs to be given throughout the conversation as things are happening, as flows are being updated, as things are changing. The QA department needs to be informed. They need to be consulted. They need to be, because they're going to be responsible at some point. They need all these other things within RACI, to kind of get in. If there's going to be any sort of certification done, obviously accountability, right? Then you have to make it its own practice. And that's one of the points I think we really need to get to is developing QA as its own practice. And I know we got into that a little bit last time, Jim, you and I did with Jason, but it's really imperative at some point to get a seat at the table, not only for analytics, but for QA specifically. I would argue that everyone within the organization, all the different disciplines, need to have a seat at the table. They need to have their input ahead of time, rather than, you hear all these things, the retrospectives and how could we have done better and all those things, where they're deconstructing all the things that went wrong, where lots of times we as analytics folks understand things as they're happening, and as things are unfolding, we can throw in some really valid points in there as, we're getting off base here, we're getting off track, this is going to probably be a problem, rather than having everything go to production, all of the data starts flowing in and it's wrong. Sorry, I made up for the last bit of not talking with extra talking.
I think one of the things that you said that is kind of key there is getting their input. Because to me, we often view QA as merely like we give them our output and they take it and run with it. And we rarely say, hey, QA person, what would be a good way to test this? Or what are some edge cases we can think of? Or, here's our ultimate goal. Can you help us get there? Rather than us just saying, here's what we think we need to do it. And I also think that a lot of that comes with just the bigger problem of needing more cross training. We don't need devs and QA people to necessarily know how to build a full, beautiful workspace report. But if you even just walk them through, hey, this is, the beacon that we're going to be looking at and how it kind of maps into the reports that we're looking at. And here's the overall process, how it starts with business requirements, and we're talking to the product folks. So that's where a lot of this comes from. A lot of them don't even have that, because they're just looking at their Jira ticket. What is the least amount of information I need to know to check that Jira ticket off? And the more folks just have that bigger picture, whether or not they become like deeply skilled at analytics, but just giving them a view into things outside of their roles, it really helps it all come together. And in the end, I think it saves a lot of headaches, because you have more people able to keep an eye out for problems and understanding what will work and what won't work and what to keep an eye out for.
In pulling your head out of the trench every once in a while and looking around, kind of like you're saying, it really does help to give different perspective on, as we mentioned before, Jim, on asking why on a lot of things. It's not enough to be given, this is what this is going to do, and this is the type of data we're going to get. Lots of times, if you're looking to form unit tests and to really put things together, you have to ask why. And you have to look at things from a user's perspective. How is the user going to use this? What's this flow? Not just the happy paths, all the unhappy paths, and what happens if I do this and what happens if I do that. And so, going back to getting context from the different parts of an organization, if you're working with a product team and the product team doesn't have the design done for a flow or pages, and you're looking at just basic wireframes, or somebody's drawing something on a whiteboard, lots of different ways to do things. Looking at all the different pieces and educating the product teams who don't really think about the analytics and what questions do we want answered, kind of helping educate them on, I see there's an X button here and there's a close. Do they do the same thing? Do you want the same thing captured? As a, for instance, you do want to know when people are abandoning your flow, right? Oh yeah, we do. Those types of things are really key critical pieces that it's really nice as a QA guy to be there for that portion of it, so that I'm not asking the same questions over and over later. I'm not asking a question that you may have asked if you were playing the analyst role, or you're playing the, I know you've got lots of hats, or you're playing the engagement person where you're talking about, potential flow. You don't have to recall that. If I'm in the conversation with you, I know the answer and I know it more deeply and I understand the flow better. So more reasons why I think we definitely need to get QA involved in the overall process.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And well, that what you were just talking about of, okay, so cart abandonment's a great example because that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So I get a list of requirements for a new site feature that's going out, and the requirements include, we want to know how often people abandon, where are they falling out in the flow, where are they abandoning, say, a form. And I know right now we're talking about QA, and yes, it is true that involving QA in some of those discussions will help raise those questions earlier on. But I'm sitting here as an implementation consultant thinking, yes, and then you need to have your implementation consultant in at that point, because when you say you want cart abandonments, you need to show me in the user experience, or give me the opportunity to ask you, okay, do you consider that when they click on the X? Do you consider that when they merely don't go from page A to page B? Is it from field 1 to field 2? Those type of things, which will inform how we do QA, but also help me build a better solution that makes sure that we're all talking about the same thing when we talk about cart abandonment. Because I'm going to ask different questions, and the QA person's going to ask different questions, and altogether, that the QA questions might not just make it QA easier down the line. It may actually make the solution better because they have insight into that type of picking it apart and thinking of edge cases and things like that that don't just apply to QA. They apply to, well, how do you want that to show in reporting?
Agreed, 100%.
So how do we get folks first to invest more in QA and see it as not just a tool, but as part of the process? And even then, not just the tail end part of the process, but a piece of every part of the process.
Well, if quality is important to you, then it should be. We should only track the things that we really care about, knowing what the data is there. And I say that a little tongue in cheek, but really we should only test the things of those things that we care about, the data being accurate.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like a lot of folks would definitely agree, like, yes, data quality is important. Often that's why they sign checks for tools and things like that, whether or not they get enough people behind them. But we're all constantly playing a game of catch up in this industry of, yes, we really want to get our QA process set up, but right now we have to make sure that we get tagging on this feature that's going out next week. And then as soon as that feature goes out, there's next week's feature that we have to get tagging on right away. And
Right.
QA just constantly gets bumped, not necessarily because it's not seen as important, but because it's not seen as time sensitive, especially for a lot of folks who have already been going however long without paying a lot of attention to data quality. And it's not until something really big breaks that you can be like, aha, this is why it was important. Getting them to see that ahead of time, that it's important enough to slow down and fit it into your current timetable, on top of just everybody desperately trying to keep up with new features and new implementations and bug fixes and stuff.
Definitely more important to explain why it's important than to have an "I told you so" moment.
Sure.
Yeah,
No, we don't like those "I told you so" moments.
No.
But as far as those "I told you so" moments go, have either of you had a situation where you've had a really big situation like that and people actually change their behavior? Because I mean, I've seen a couple times where we've had a few big moments and we said, if we were able to slow down and actually fully vet this wouldn't have happened. And I feel like within a few weeks to a few months, the old behavior was back and everybody forgot that. So there was a lot of talk, a lot of promises, a lot of, we're going to do these steps going forward. We're going to make sure we slow down and we really check things, but then the old behavior comes back.
Right.
What have you both seen when you've had those "I told you so" moments?
Trying to think, because I do have a customer in my past that definitely had that, or client, kind of shift at some point. I'm trying to remember what even started it, because there were definitely points where we're like, oh, told you so, we should have tested that, or now that we've seen this error, we know that we need to test in IE 10 better, or whatever it is. So it might be that when something breaks and something goes wrong, rather than saying, well, how do we fix our whole process? We say, what's the Band-Aid that would have prevented this exact thing from happening again? And that is testing in IE 10, or whatever small thing it is, rather than fixing the whole process. But I did have one client that we called it a reset workshop, because it was really looking at the entire process, not just with QA, though data quality was a huge problem, but also with scalability and maintainability of their implementation. And we said, like, this is not working. There are too many points of failure. We're not catching those failures. Let's redefine our whole process from beginning to end. And a big part of that was making sure we documented and understood, this is the user flow, these are the edge cases. If we're saying we're tracking an add to cart as part of this new site feature, well, what do all of our add to carts have in common? And what is this one going to do that's slightly different? Let's document that and I'll have it in mind. That helps with QA, but that also helps me as the tech spec builder not have to reinvent the wheel every time. So I have seen it done. I'll admit that was a little while ago. And it's sad how much I haven't seen it done since then, just because, like I said, we're all constantly trying to keep up. And if there is a failure, we'll often think of the immediate, well, this happened because we didn't test IE 10. Let's do that next time.
I've run into those too as well with browser specific, and I've pulled them out before as well when somebody said, how long is this going to take to test, to QA, to get certification on this? And when I tell them, typically it takes 3 to 5 days, there's the why so long?
Right.
Well, we're testing 4 different browsers. We're testing real devices. We're going through a litany of tests at this point. We're looking at the entire SDR. We're looking at all of your props and EVARs, making sure everything looks good end to end, within the browser as well as in the Adobe report suite. You're making sure that you're seeing things hitting the appropriate report suite. There's a lot of moving parts there as it relates to doing QA. Going back to the other thing that you said about having issues where something happened. I do have a small war story here where add to carts stopped working at a company I was working with, and it was some sort of really seemingly innocuous change that was made. I believe it was to searches, where some code was switched around, and from the page, there was a product detail page, and there was just a regular product page as well, with all the different items. On the detail page, if you went there and you clicked add to cart, the button, it didn't track. If you clicked it from the main product page with all the products, it worked fine. And so we noticed during the day, it was during a regular production release, everything was fine. Right about the time everything was all the code had been dropped in Citon, and tested out fine. Everything looked good. And there was another change that was made by the front end group, maybe about an hour after we had gotten into our testing, and right about that time, it just cliffed for all of the product detail pages. And I think I'm quoting the person right. We didn't think there would be a problem with making this change. They didn't tell us, obviously, and it was a complete hairs on fire, everybody's running around moment because the freaking add to carts stopped working.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure we all have so many stories where it's we made a small change that we didn't think would affect anything.
Right.
And turns out it does. I certainly have quite a few where it was my change that I had a client where they had a very small team, and I was the main person in their tag management system, and also their main person doing an EQA, which, by the way, don't have a person be their own QA person. Where the tiniest of change, and I publish it without going through a thorough QA because it was only going to affect one tiny thing, and I checked that one tiny thing in the user happy path, and it breaks. And those are the worst days as a consultant, to be like, I broke something. Like, I will lose sleep if I know that I lost hours of important reporting. Thankfully, that's not something that happens very often, but it traumatizes me when it does. And every time that happens, it's one of those like, okay, next time, and that'll last for a while. I have a few years or so of always being very thorough and careful until the next time. And that's just, I feel like a lot of the time we are playing whack-a-mole. What you just described, Eric, of being very methodical versus the whack-a-mole approach of, oh, this time we missed this problem that happens in IE 10. I think my favorite ever was Safari 5. We found that all of our visitors were the visitor ID service wasn't working on Safari 5, and you say, why Safari 5? That is the last version of Safari that you can still use on a PC. And apparently there are some people out there that use it. And apparently it doesn't work well with modern ways of identifying users. So those type of things, we're like, well, now we know. Whereas if we go to Eric, he's played so many games of whack-a-mole, he knows all of the moles and how to whack them in advance. That, going to somebody that has all of those experiences and can say, these are things that we know frequently cause problems. We're going to look at them in advance before they even become problems. It's a big headache saver in the end.
What are your thoughts of releasing code on a Friday?
Don't do it.
Eric, I thought of this as you were going through your story about 2 months ago. A client we work with, they had their developer release what was supposed to be a minor update to the search results page, and it foobarred the data layer completely on those pages. So search tracking just dropped completely. And they pushed it out on Friday, and I think it was done against the developer's better judgment. But again, they were kind of being pushed. Oh, come on, it's a small update. Let's get it out. And then Monday comes along, and there's no search tracking. And search tracking was down for almost about a week by the time they got it fixed, QA'd, and actually deployed.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So I've seen stuff like that, and then you've got various rollbacks, contingency programs and that can be a pain too, right? Mm-hmm. If I roll my code back and these guys haven't rolled their code back.
Exactly. Yeah.
That turns into another tedious exercise.
Have to QA your rollback thoroughly and not just assume it'll work the way that it did last time.
Exactly. I'm so on edge at that point. I hate when that happens. One of the rules broke. Something search tracking. And that's a big one. I mean, that's a big one to break. Friday, I'm going to act like I didn't hear the Friday releasing code on a Friday. That's terrifying.
Yeah, it's scary. It's cold sweats.
I prefer Tuesdays or Wednesdays. It's a good day of the week. Monday, despite all your good intentions, everybody always has something happen over the weekend or,
Yeah.
Especially if you're releasing code on Friday. Your likelihood is high.
I think one of the nightmares that comes to mind for me was this last year on New Year's Day. A slew of Adobe Analytics. I think it was this last year. I don't know. Time is a loose concept in 2020. But on New Year's Day, a lot of folks who had the Get Time Parting plugin for Adobe Analytics, Adobe Consulting had a copy and paste snippet that covered everything up through year 2019. And then as soon as you got to 2020, the plugin broke, and it broke all analytics tracking. It didn't just break that variable. Yep. And so New Year's Day, we're all on vacation. It's not a code release issue because we haven't changed anything. It's just the calendar changed. And some of my clients that had alerts set up caught it almost immediately. And then fortunately, we were all able to go to all the other clients and say, eek, look at this. Otherwise, we could have gone days before we came back from vacation, we realized we had lost all our data from January 1st onwards. So I guess that's an argument for regular testing regardless of publishing cycles and setting up alerts and things like that, it's not always something that you did that's going to break it.
And automation for that.
Yeah.
And automation with alerts. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I want to pivot the conversation a bit and go back to what we talked about a little bit earlier in this conversation, the previous conversation about QA, data quality, and analytics in general not having a seat at the big table. And one of the reasons for that is analytics and the data quality of it are seen as a cost center. Whereas like the sales pitch from all of the technology companies out there is, analytics being able to impact revenue, all of that data you're now collecting, how you can actually have a positive impact on revenue. Why, if that's the sales pitch, why is analytics and the data quality needs that come with it still seen as a cost center and not something that can actually drive revenue?
Jen?
Yeah, sorry, I was having a weird, it all of a sudden sounded like a remix of Jim beatboxing or something there for a moment. I had to
Funny.
on cost center, right? Well, first of all, talking about having QA have a big seat or a seat at the big table, for a lot of folks, it's not a big table. What do you do when you only have an analytics team of 2 or 3 people? And it's hard to justify even the headcount for those 3, much less add in another person, or as is often the case, give one of those 3 people, tell them, oh, by the way, you're now a QA expert on top of your day job. So it is bigger than just QA. That whole cost center versus profit center. If your company views analytics as a cost center, then it's going to be harder to get more than 3 people at your table. It's kind of a catch-22 though, because if you have low quality data, it's hard to prove out your value. And if you can't prove out your value, you can't get the resources you need to improve the quality of your data. Yeah, the whole cost center versus profit center for your COE, that's a big topic and a big point of frustration, I guess, for me, how hard it is to get higher up folks to not just see the value in kind of a lip servicey way, because everybody sees the value. We're a data-driven company. We love data. We see the value of data, but seeing it to the extent that you invest in the right resources and aren't just getting it so you can check off the box that you have analytics implemented, but rather start getting value out of it. So I don't know. I don't feel like I answered your question other than to say it's a big problem. And I wish I knew a better way of establishing that the analytics, that it is something that can generate profit if you let it. But frankly, it is a cost center at some places, and that's why it's seen as such.
I think you can look at data quality as an indicator of the success of what, and my son's home, as a success of how you're apologize.
He sounds happy. That's a happy sounding dog.
You can look at data quality as success of how the strategy has gone for the implementation and everything else around. Hold on just one second. Be right with you. Sorry, guys. Let me get my bearings back here.
That's all right. That's part of 2020, I think.
Right. The strategy around getting everything in place with tracking, with all these expensive tools and all of these expensive people, looking at the data quality that you have is really important. I've got a quote here that we've got on our website from Kissmetrics. The average enterprise can achieve up to a 70% boost in revenue based on data quality alone. So poor data quality will affect your bottom line. Good data quality will positively affect your bottom line. So are you spending money? Is it a cost center, or are you saving money through the savings in data quality, making better decisions, being more informed, having conversations with your customers that you can in turn measure, and that you can drive value from. So I guess testing would be a good proof of that, where you've got a hypothesis. If we're to have a pop-up versus a modal, which one would be more effective in driving conversions for something on the site? You could either say, we feel that the modal is it's intrusive on my customer experience, so I don't want to have this modal popping up. Whereas having some sort of banner option where the person can see a call to action and click on it and then act on it may be a better option. Using science, we know that we can suppress that modal, not have it pop up, maybe show a banner instead, and test, experience A versus experience B. And we can have a clear winner, using Optimizely or Target or something like that, to do so. And in turn, we can directly impact our bottom line there, where we can say, you were wrong. The modal actually performs better than this banner, for instance, where we can invest more of the time in working on more banners that drive more revenue.
Right.
Just as for instance, but there's a lot of a lot of ways that we as analysts can and analytics folks can help drive bottom line revenue.
And sometimes I get jealous of my more optimization-y peers because it's much easier to prove out the value. You can point at a chart and say, we brought your conversion up X% or increased revenue X%. Whereas QA or implementation, if we're doing our job well, it's we're kind of invisible. You only see it if it goes wrong, and it's much harder to quantify. I saved you guys X amount of headaches this year, or I reduced the amount of time it takes to put out a quality tech spec, or we caught X number of errors. Those things just aren't as easy to get excited about as we increased conversion 5%.
Improving data quality, though, there are studies out there that definitively that it does increase.
Absolutely. It's just harder to be a cheerleader for, I suppose, or to convince other people of how it affects the bottom line. Unless you have these big I told you so moments. Unfortunately, that's when it's easier to say, see, this cost you guys X amount to fix this, or you lost this much of revenue. Now I'm valuable.
Yeah, I've had that conversation where, how much is this going to cost me is what I hear. How much? Okay, that's great. You're going to develop this regression test for me with all of these tests, this test plan, this marvelous thing that you want to do for me. How much is it going to cost me? Which is the wrong question, really. It's it's going to help you sleep better at night because you're going to be testing more thoroughly. How much is a production error cost, right? How much does it cost to fix something like the item that Jim that you mentioned? How much did that end up costing in terms of man hours, poor data quality? I'm sure the next week the sprint wasn't solely focused on break fixes. I'm sure there was something else they wanted to do. So there's opportunity costs, and how much did that cost? Right.
Yeah, definitely. So as we start to wrap up, I want to pose a pretty broad question to you both, because I want to get your thoughts. As you look back on your experience, as well as look at where the space is today, what do you see as like the biggest threat to data quality? What do you see as like the most common thread that constantly comes across that leads to issues, or just like what do you see as the biggest problem out there?
Sunk cost. People who are so invested in their current way of doing things, or have already dug a hole so deep they don't know how to get out. To me, that's the biggest problem I see time and time again is, yes, we understand the value of data quality and of setting up these processes right, but we already have so much technical debt from having not done it right in the past. How do we start getting out of the hole? Or people are just too attached to the current way of doing things, or the current process, or their current data set, to be willing to re-examine it and maybe change things up.
But that's how we've always done it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Don't you hate hearing that in a meeting?
I really, really do.
So I think a couple other that's a good one. I think a couple others are, and we talked about this in our last discussion, Jim, the upcoming browser changes and privacy and things like that. As more and more changes are made and more folks are concerned with their privacy, I think tools are going to have to catch up, and the industry as a whole is going to have to be more creative, a lot more server side things, obviously. And who knows where we end up in terms with a lot of that stuff. Optimization is immediately impacted due to a lot of those things as well. And then other data quality centric things. I would think that, hold on, I have people moving around again. I would think that quality is really a result of, the effort that's put into things. So going back to quality QA not having a seat at the table, that's something that needs to be solved in the short term. If you don't have all of the different disciplines participating in the conversation, and you really relegate QA and analytics to the back of the bus or the caboose, as we mentioned previously, and you keep them there, your best intentions will fail ultimately every time, just due to the fact that you don't have the proper focus on the folks as a whole. So you could put 7 figures into your tools, 7 figures into your people, and then have horrible process and fall on your face. Or you could have, some good tools and some, good people, and throw some good process around it and outperform every time. It really matters how keenly focused you are on doing things correctly, and not just checking the boxes, not just throwing QA on at the end, because that's where it's always been, and that's kind of how we're going to do it, but making it part of the entire chain, an equal part. Until you do that, you're constantly going to have those what happened, why did we hit this wall, or why is this not tracking now? The faster we're running, and that's the other one, the faster we run, we want to go faster. We want to release 18 times a week, right? I mean,
We're agile.
It's getting crazy. The faster we get with these things, the more prone we are to error.
Yeah.
And the more we keep QA out of the loop, and the more we relegate them to the, to the back, the worse it's going to be. You're going to make more mistakes. You're going to drop more, while you're running. I really think we need to have more of a focus on making sure that QA is properly represented.
Man, if I could choose any sound bite from this whole thing, the whole you can have 7 figures of tools and people and without process. Yes, that absolutely 100% that, and that's the part that to me it's hardest to sell leadership on, because I can go to leadership and tell them why to invest in a tool, and outside of a pandemic, I can probably go to leadership and tell them why they should invest in more people. But telling leadership, hey, I need your active involvement to get everybody in the department, everybody who has a vested interest in analytics involved, and to change their daily approach to things. That's only going to happen with a kind of united vision coming from leadership and enforcement coming from leadership, and that's really hard to get. Often because it's outside of said leadership's wheelhouse. Perhaps they haven't done it in the past. We have to train them on how to communicate and care and all of the different pieces that would need to change for an entire department to have the right processes in place for analytics. So I guess that's my plea out there to leadership. Realize that it's not just the tools and the people, but the vision and the processes that needs to be kind of communicated from the top and followed throughout an entire organization.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. So again, thank you both for joining us today. This has been a really fun conversation, and I think it's something you can never talk enough about. Constantly trying to bump up the importance of making sure that you're not just tracking things, but you're tracking things right. So as we wrap up, Eric, just give us a quick rundown of where people can find you.
Still at dataquakegroup.com. I'm going to be starting a podcast soon. Jen, I want you on it for sure. Jim and Jason, I've already invited you as well. Just think somebody needs to do a QA analytics specific podcast in the future. Going to continue our conversations that we've been having with some of these organizations around data quality. And so look forward to that in the future.
Cool. That sounds great. Well, again, thank you both, and we'll catch everybody later.
Take care.